What is going on, everyone? Welcome to episode number 43 of Not What It Seems. So a little bit of updates with the CBA stuff. Apparently they met on Monday and Tuesday, both sides, the Players Association and the league. And apparently there wasn't a ton of traction, which is not really the news we want to hear. You could see certain players are becoming frustrated. And it's understandable. Everyone wants spring training to start on time, and as of now, it really doesn't seem like that's the case. But we'll have to wait and see. Not really too many updates with that at the moment, but moving into Hall of Fame talks, Hall of Fame inductees were announced on Tuesday, I believe, and so big news. First of all, congratulations, David Ortiz is in the Hall of Fame on his first year on the ballot. um, Ortiz, I believe he got about 78% of the vote, and you needed at least 75. So um, good for the writers for getting Ortiz in. It's funny that once Edgar Martinez got in, David Ortiz is another DH, and he gets in on his first year on the ballot. So that's pretty interesting there, in the sense that the opposite, not really the opposite, but in a similar situation with steroid users, still no steroid users got in. Bonds, Clemens did not get in. Um, Neither did Sosa, anybody like that. Kurt Schilling also did not get in. Obviously, there are different reasons the writers think that he shouldn't be in. It's not steroids, but man, I don't know. I didn't think that Bonds and Clemens really weren't going to get in. I thought this was going to be the year. I thought this was going to be the turning point. Um, it didn't really make much sense to me. I think there's a way, obviously, later on in life that they can get in, which I think will happen. You know, it's simply put, to me, I know I talked about it a couple episodes ago. This is a museum for players who played the game the right way. It's not a museum for players who you think did it wrong off the field. Again, PEDs. Did they use them? Yes, but did they have the stats on the field that you look at them and that's good baseball player stat, meaning that's what the Hall of Fame is? Absolutely. Whatever the case may be, they'll obviously get in eventually, but we'll just have to wait and see. So moving on to Ortiz, though, a lot of people forget how good he actually was. So David Ortiz played 20 years. I didn't even remember he played all 20 seasons. So he spent his first 6 years with Minnesota. Obviously, the final 14 seasons were with Boston. His overall stats with Minnesota, he hit 266, 58 homers, 238 RBIs, 809 OPS, and that's pretty good numbers. That's obviously not what got him into the Hall of Fame, but he started his career there. He was kind of just finding himself. And look, he had an OPS above 800 there, so he was getting on base a lot there. But then you move on to his stats when he goes to Boston. Overall, over those 14 seasons, he had 290, 483 homers, 1,500 RBIs, 956 OPS. And when you total all that together, he had over 500 homers. He had a career OPS above 900. His 162 game average was 286, 36 bombs, 119 RBIs, 931 OPS. Excuse me. So, will you take those numbers? Absolutely. Those are probably arguably the best numbers by any DH ever, even though Edgar had great numbers as well. This is honestly going to be pretty hard to break. For another DH to have as good of a career as David Ortiz had. We'll have to wait and see. But a lot of the magic from Ortiz, though, obviously came from the postseason, man. He played in 85 total postseason games. 9 of those games were with Minnesota and 76 were with Boston. His career postseason stats: 289, 17 home runs, 61 RBIs, 947 OPS. He was also the 2004 ALCS MVP with Boston. He was the 2007 World Series MVP, and he won the World Series 3 times. in 2004, 2007, and 2013. So, I mean, the amount of clutch moments we've seen from Big Papi in the postseason, it just seems like every time he stepped up to the plate, there was something magical was about to happen. And it almost always did. Whether it was against the Yankees those years, obviously a lot of people remember the home run in the ALCS against Detroit when Torrey Hunter flipped over the wall trying to catch it, and he didn't. So Ortiz was amazing in the postseason, and he was really a big reason why Boston won all three of those world championships. If you just look at his career accolades, like I said, he's a three-time World Series champ. He's a seven-time Silver Slugger. He's a 10-time All-Star. Again, take All-Star with what you want to. And he also won a home run derby. I don't remember what year exactly that was, but he did win the derby one year. So that's always a cool stat. If you just look at his counting stats, though, like he led the American League in RBIs in 2005, 2006, and 2016. Led the American League in home runs in 2006, in doubles in 2016, in walks in 2006 and 2007. He led the AL in on-base percentage in 2007, and he led the AL in slugging and OPS in 2016. Now, keep in mind, 2016 was his last season. I believe he was 40 years old. And in 2016, he led the league in doubles and slugging and OPS, also in RBI. The guy probably didn't even need to retire. He put up one of arguably his best seasons when he was 40 years old. You don't really see a ton of that. I guess it's different because he's a DH, but still, that doesn't discount what he did. So he also never won an MVP, but in 2005, he finished second in MVP voting. 2006, he finished third. 2004 and 2007, he finished fourth in the voting. Then you just change up the list a little bit. In 2003, he finished fifth. 2016, he finished sixth, which he should have finished way higher than sixth that year. He probably could have potentially even won it. 2013, he finished 10th, and 2015, he finished 28th. So obviously those are a little less, but man, to me, if you just the stats I just rattled off alone, the guy was a hitting machine. He drove in runs. He would always hit third or fourth in Boston's lineup every single day, day in and day out. I don't remember him being on the IL very often. Obviously, to put up these stats, you had to be healthy. So, real big congrats to Big Papi here. Obviously, he's going to have the whole ceremony to himself. He's the only one that got voted in. So that's pretty much how you draw it up for a guy like him. So big congrats to him. Hell of a career. And he's getting what he deserves in the Hall of Fame. So moving on to rosters of kind of recent memory that should have probably won more than they did. So this week, we're going to talk about the 2018 Arizona Diamondbacks. They finished 82-80. They were third in the NL West behind the Dodgers and the Rockies. If you remember, that was the season that the Dodgers and the Rockies actually had to play an extra game, I believe, to see who would win the division. Obviously, it ended up being the Dodgers. But a lot of people forget the Rockies were actually that close. But yeah, the year before, obviously in 2017, the Rockies hosted the wild card game against the Rockies, and they ended up winning, and then they lost to the Dodgers in the NLDS. And obviously they were in second place because they hosted the game. So they kind of dropped off a little bit in 2018. And man, their roster didn't change a ton. They had Ketel Marte playing second base in 2018. This was kind of before he broke out and became like who we know now of Ketel Marte. But so this year he had a 768 OPS, 14 home runs. He hit leadoff pretty much every game, I believe, unless he was not playing. Played 153 games, so he played almost the whole year. Then you had AJ Pollock in center field. That's when he was still with the D-backs. That year, he had an 800 OPS, 21 homers. He played in 113 games, and he had 13 stolen bases. So got hurt a little bit, but he pretty much gets hurt every single season. No offense to him, but you need to stay healthy to put up better numbers. So he obviously has done great with the Dodgers so far. Then you move on to David Peralta. This was probably Peralta's best season ever. He hit 293, 30 homers, 87 RBIs, 868 OPS, played in 140-ish games, so missed about 20 games or so, but pretty solid season. Then you had Paul Goldschmidt. Um, Paul Goldschmidt, 158 games, of course, because he's barely ever injured. 290, 33 homers, 83 RBIs. You would have thought the RBIs would have been a little bit higher for Goldschmidt. That was kind of interesting to me. But he had a 922 OPS, so he had a great season. Then you had Jake Lamb started the season as the everyday third baseman, but then at the trade deadline, this was actually the year that they traded for Eduardo Escobar. And so I think Escobar kind of took over Lamb's role because Lamb was kind of struggling. So I combined both of their numbers this year for the season. So they both played in a total of 110 games for the Diamondbacks. I'm not counting Escobar's stats with the Twins that year. 245, 14 homers, 719 OPS. Obviously, the numbers kind of bounced up when Escobar went over there compared to Lamb, but not terrible. Then you had Nick Ahmed. This is probably Ahmed's best season too. This season he played 153 games. He hit 16 homers, 70 RBIs. So pretty solid RBI season for him. His OPS was only 700, but he just kept driving in runs. So pretty solid season from him. Then you had Steven Souza, who missed a ton of time this season. He only played in 72 games. He was playing right field most of the time. Only had 5 homers, a 678 OPS, so not great there. Then the catcher who played the most games for them this season was John Ryan Murphy. He played in 87 games. He had 9 home runs and a 619 OPS. So those two guys, not really great stats. But otherwise, man, the lineup was pretty solid. You know, I think Peralta had his monster season out of nowhere. If I mean the top four, let's say five, if you count Escobar when he came over in the lineup, was really solid. Then you had a shortstop who's not usually a pretty good hitter, and he drove in 70 runs. So I would say the top six guys really did their job in the lineup this season. Their offense was not the problem. I don't remember if this was when the ball was still flying out of the ballpark in Arizona before they added the humidifier thing. I believe so, because Peralta never really put up numbers like that ever. So yeah, I mean, the offense was clearly not the issue for them. Then you had the pitching rotation, which really was awesome. This was way better than I remember it. So they had Zach Greinke at the top. He had a 3.21 ERA. He had 199 strikeouts this season. Then you had Patrick Corbin, who had a 3.15 ERA. This was kind of the year he broke out before he ended up going to the Nationals. So he had a 3.15 ERA, 246 strikeouts. He had 11 strikeouts per nine. It's a pretty high number for him. Then you had this year's Cy Young winner, Robbie Ray. Pitched in 24 games, so he missed probably 10 starts this season. But he had a 3.93 ERA, so not terrible. He had 165 strikeouts, 12 strikeouts per nine. Then you had a guy, Clay Buchholz, who I actually forgot played for the Diamondbacks. This season, he had 16 starts, so he was hurt for a little bit too. But when he was on the field, he had a 2.01 ERA, which is astronomically low for a guy like that at his age when he was kind of declining. He had a great season. He had a 1.037 whip. That was the lowest on the entire staff in Arizona. So was the ERA. So those top four guys were really solid. Then you had Zach Godley, who had a 4.74 ERA, but he had 9 strikeouts per nine, 185 strikeouts. So his ERA was kind of ballooned up there. But still, if you have four guys in your rotation whose ERAs are below 4, and then your fifth guy's ERA is below 5, that's a recipe for success, in my opinion. I don't really understand how they only won 82 games with a rotation like this and an offense like they had. Because honestly, their bullpen was not an issue either. They had Brad Boxberger, who had 32 saves. His ERA was above 4, but he did have 32 saves, so he didn't blow that many games. And he had 12 strikeouts per nine, which I believe was a career high for him. Then you had TJ McFarland, who I believe signed with the Cardinals before the lockout ended. He had a 2 ERA that season. So he was really solid for them too. Then you had Archie Bradley, obviously was really good for them. He had a 3.64 ERA. He also had 3 saves. Then you had Yoshi Hirano, who had come over from Japan, I believe in 2017, maybe it was 2018 though. He had a 2.44 ERA, and then you had Andrew Chafin, who kind of moved around a lot this year, was at the Cubs and the A's, and he had a 3.10 ERA this season. So the bullpen, obviously not an issue either. They had guys who most of them had ERAs below 4, some had ERAs below 3. TJ McFarland almost had an ERA below 2. So those top bullpen guys really weren't problems either. And then if you look at their bench, they had Daniel Descalso played the most games from the bench, 138 games. So he was kind of just filling in for guys left and right. He had 13 homers, 57 RBIs, and a 789 OPS. From your top bench guy, who's a utility guy, he played all the infield positions, I believe, and all the outfield positions that season. I don't know. That's exactly what you want. Solid numbers, pop once in a while, drove in runs, and he had an OPS close to 800. It kind of declines a little bit on the bench after this. You had John Jay, who kind of filled in defensively a lot. He only had 2 homers, 629 OPS, not great. Chris Owings was kind of the other backup infielder, 4 homers. He had 11 stolen bases. Gerard Dyson was actually on this team too, which I didn't remember either. And he had 16 stolen bases. Not really much else to talk about on offense. Obviously, he was more of a defensive speed guy. Then you had Alex Avila, was primarily the backup catcher there. He only hit 165, but he had 7 homers and he had 20 RBIs. So he didn't play a ton. But the 165 batting average was kind of strange when you look at the 7 homers. But man, to me though, when I look at this team, I just don't see why they only won 82 games. There's a lot of teams. Obviously, there's always teams like that. Whether it's the Phillies, we look at the Phillies every season, like, man, they have a good roster. I don't understand why they're always right around 500. This season, again, obviously the Dodgers and the Rockies were both really good teams, powerhouses. They both had great starting rotations, great offenses. But from the stats I just gave you, so did the Diamondbacks. I guess this could have had maybe something to do with just losing to the teams ahead of them, close games or something, because from their offense to their starting rotation, that was probably one of the best in the league that year. Their bullpen was really good. And they had just come off a playoff season. So it's not like they were changing the roster a lot. Most of these guys on the roster were on the team the year before. So it was very interesting to me that the Diamondbacks didn't make it farther than they did. 82-80, right around 500. You're always just going to wonder what if they had played better, they might have been in a 3-way tie with the Dodgers and the Rockies for the division. You never know, but obviously the Diamondbacks are in a little bit of a rebuild right now, but they should probably be back in the playoffs within the next 5 years or so. So we'll look for that to change around down in the desert. Okay, so this week I'm actually going to kind of dive into rosters of recent memory that actually probably should have lost more than they did. We've kind of just been talking about teams who probably should have done better. Well, let's look at some teams that their stats weren't great and they still somehow did pretty good. So I'm going to talk about the 2021 New York Yankees. I'm going to talk about my team, believe it or not. So the Yankees this season were 92-70. They were tied with Boston for second in the AL East behind the Rays. Obviously, they played the wild card game at Fenway because Boston had won the season series. So, and ended up losing the wild card game. But man, if you look at their stats, they probably shouldn't have even really made the playoffs. I'm gonna compare some stats with the Yankees for their like 2021 numbers compared to like their last full season. So I'm counting guys' last full season as playing at least 100 games. So I'm not counting the shortened season. And if they were hurt a ton in 2019 or 2018, I'm going to count 2017 numbers or 2018 numbers or something like that. So, if you just look at a guy like DJ LeMahieu, for example, in 2021, obviously, again, I'm going to say this first off, he was battling injuries this season, but the stats are what the stats are. So in 2021, he hit below 300. He only had 10 home runs. He had an OPS of 711, only drove in 57 runs. in 2019, he played 145 games, about the same amount of games he played this year. He hit above 300, 26 homers, 102 RBIs, and OPS close to 900. So that's a good example of having your leadoff hitter just completely drop off a cliff. Um, Again, he was injured, but that's not really the point. So in 2021, the Yankees only had 3 players with an OPS above 800 and only 1 player with an OPS above 900. So the guys that had OPSs above 800 were Giancarlo Stanton, who actually had a really good season this year too. He had an OPS of 870, and Joey Gallo had an 808 OPS. I'm counting the guys that got traded over. I'm going to count their entire season stats here. Obviously, he only played about 60 games with the Yankees, including the wild card game. But yeah, Joey Gallo had an 808 OPS, and Aaron Judge had a 916 OPS. Obviously, Judge had a fantastic season. Probably should have been in more MVP consideration, considering how bad the team actually was, and he brought us to the playoffs. So we're going to compare that in everyone's last full season and the whole starting lineup pretty much. No player had an OPS below 829. 3 players had an OPS above 900, and that was Judge, Joey Gallo, and Anthony Rizzo. Obviously, Gallo and Rizzo weren't on the Yankees at the time, but in everyone's last full season, Judge had a 921 OPS, so his OPS was actually better in 2019 when he played in 102 games. So he did get hurt, but then you had Joey Gallo, who had a fantastic season in 2018. He had a 986 OPS. Then Anthony Rizzo back in 2019 had a 924 OPS. And yeah, everybody else had an OPS in the 800s. This season was completely different. Then if you're going to look at the home runs, in 2021, 4 players had less than 20 homers in the Yankees starting 9. 6 players had less than 30 homers, which 30 homers is a lot, but still. This season, Gio Urshela only had 14 homers. Brett Gardner only had 10. Glaber only had 9. Glaber really dropped off. Like I said before, DJ had 10. Then you had Rizzo only had 22. Gary only had 23. And again, I say only, but when I'm going to compare their numbers from their last full seasons, so in each player's last full season, all 9 players had over 20 homers, and 4 had more than 30. So if you look at Stanton, for example, Stanton back in 2018 had 38 homers. Gallo back in 2018 had 40. Glaber had 38 in 2019. Gary had 34 in 2019. So, the Bronx Bombers, the power kind of just fell out this season, aside from Judge and Stanton. Gallo did have 38 homers too. So I guess those 3 guys were probably the biggest power guys on the team this year. Judge had 39, Stanton had 35, and Gallo had 38. So that's pretty solid power numbers from the 3 guys that are going to hit back to back to back in your lineup. But if you got guys like Gleyber Torres, who you're expecting at least 20 homers from, only hitting 9, DJ LeMahieu, you're expecting at least 20, only hitting 10. Brett Gardner, I know he's getting older, but back in 2019 was his last full season. He had 28 home runs. This season, he only had 10. He drove in 74 runs in 2019. This year, he only drove in 39. Gio Urshela, too. You're expecting at least 20 from him. Back in 2019, he had 21 homers. He hit above 300. He had an OPS close to 900. This year, he hit 267. He only had 49 RBIs, and he had a 720 OPS. Really just not the same guy that he used to be this season. Then, like I said, if you want to look at RBIs, in 2021, only 3 players had more than 70 RBIs, and only 2 had more than 90. So Judge and Stanton had 98 and 97 respectively, and then Gallo this season had 77. Otherwise, no guy had more than 70 RBIs. And like I said, that means no player had over 100. In each player's last full season, 8 players had more than 70 RBIs, 5 had more than 90, and 2 had over 100. That was LeMahieu in 19, had 102, and then Stanton in 2018 had exactly 100. Anthony Rizzo had 94 RBIs in 2019. Gleyber Torres had 90. Gallo had 92. Brett Gardner had 74, like I said. Urshela had 74. Gary had 77 in 2019. Compared to this year, Urshela had 49, Gardner had 39, Gary had 54, Rizzo 61. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Glaber only had around 50. when you have guys like this that have put up great numbers in the past, that's what you expect from them. And the offense just really, it was really strikeout or bust for the most part, aside from Judge and Stanton. Because if you even just strike out or power, it was like a home run or you're going to strike out. Because if you look at Gallo, yes, he had an OPS above 800. He had 38 home runs, drove in 77, but his batting average was below 200. He struck out a ton. He didn't really hit with guys on base much, or else his RBI total obviously would have been way higher because he had 38 homers. So, um, the offense for the Yankees was a huge problem this year. I think that some of these guys are going to turn it around next year. Obviously, this was coming off of the shortened season. So, know if that had something to do with it or not. But man, if you look at it just simply from an offensive perspective, the Yankees really should not have made the playoffs at all. Because, like we talked about the Blue Jays, I believe it was last week or the week before. You look at the Blue Jays offense compared to the Yankees, it's not even close. Teoscar Hernandez, Vlad Guerrero Jr., Gurriel, the list just goes on there. You got Bichette, you had Simeon. They all had fantastic seasons, career years, pretty much. And you look at the Yankees, Judge had a really, really good season. Stanton also had a really, really good season. But otherwise, not many guys on the team offensively did much at all. Honestly, you think that the Yankees have the Bronx Bombers thing, but this year their pitching really held them afloat. Um, if you look at what each player did during their last full season, not this year, except for Judge and Stanton, because they had really great seasons in 2021. If you slap the 2021 pitching staff with everyone's numbers from their last full season, you would probably have the perfect recipe for success if you're the Yankees. Obviously, that's not possible, but next year, if everybody performs the way they can, you could have that. Because this year, I mean, Garrett Cole had a great season. Obviously, he finished second in Cy Young, 3.23 ERA over 30 starts, 243 strikeouts. Then you had Jordan Montgomery, pitched in 30 games as well. He had a 3.83 ERA, pretty solid ERA below 4. Corey Kluber also had a 3.83 ERA. Obviously, he got hurt a little bit. He only pitched 16 games, but still, good season by him. Then you had Nestor Cortez break out this year. He had a 2.90 ERA and 10 strikeouts per 9. So those 4 guys all had ERAs below 4. Obviously, Nestor had an ERA below 3, so he was really phenomenal. Then you had Jameson Taillon, who had a 4.30 ERA, but he did have a stretch where he was, I think it was about 10 games straight, where his ERA was probably below 3, maybe even below 2. So he was also coming off the injuries. So this year we'll probably expect him to have an ERA at least closer to 3. Then you had Domingo Germán, also pitched in 18 games. He had a 4.58 ERA. He also kind of dropped off as the season went on. They used him in the bullpen a little bit, but if you look at Taillon and then the 4 guys in front of him, just basically from the stats standpoint, that's a really solid rotation. Like I was saying before, with the Diamondbacks, if you have 4 guys who have ERAs below 4 and another guy that has an ERA just above 4, that's recipe for success for a starting rotation. And also keep in mind that Luis Severino missed nearly the entire season, and when he came back, he only went in. He pitched in the bullpen, so he's going to be back next year too. So you're going to have Cole, Montgomery, Taillon, Severino, and Nestor will probably be the rotation. That's pretty solid in my opinion. Then you look at the bullpen arms. Aroldis Chapman obviously had a little bit of trouble when the sticky stuff substances thing was going on. But he did have 30 saves for us. He had a 3.36 ERA, almost 100 strikeouts, 15 and a half strikeouts per 9. That's insane. He always puts up numbers like that, though. Then you had Loizaga, who had a 2.17 ERA. He also picked up 5 saves. Chad Green picked up 6 saves. He had a 3.12 ERA. So those guys kind of picked up the slack when Chapman was struggling. Lucas Licky is a guy that broke out this year. We signed to a minor league deal, and he was really good. He had a 2.74 ERA. Excuse me. Then you had Wandy Peralta, had a 2.95 ERA. He was a guy we traded for from the Giants earlier in the season. He also had 3 saves. Then you had Clay Holmes, who's a guy we traded for from Pittsburgh. about halfway through the season. And once he got to the Bronx, he had a 1.61 ERA. So he was really, really great for us. Then you had Joely Rodriguez, who was part of the Joey Gallo trade. He had a 2.84 ERA. I believe we also did re-sign him, so I think he's back on the team this year. I mean, the bullpen, say what you want about Chapman's struggles. The bullpen was great. So like I said, if you match this bullpen and this starting staff with everyone's best seasons in not including like everyone's latest season, full season, not including this year, and you just include Judge and Stanton's stats from this season, that would be the recipe for success for the Yankees to do better. And I think they got a chance to do it next year. They're just going to have guys really perform because, we're giving Gary another shot here, but this is the last shot. I believe he's a free agent after the season, if not after next year. Brett Gardner is free agent right now. Obviously, he'll most likely be back. He usually comes back around the start of spring training. We expect Urshela to kind of be better. Obviously, he battled some injuries this year too, which could have had something to do with it. Glaber, I don't expect 38 homers from him anymore. I don't think that was fair of us to want him to hit that many home runs. But do I expect like 20 to 25? Sure. Do I expect Gallo to be a little bit better? Yeah, I expect him to put up the same power numbers as well. Obviously, DJ was hurt, like I said, so he's going to be better. And I didn't even mention Aaron Hicks, who pretty much missed the entire season. He's going to be back next year. And in his last full season in 2019 or 2018, he was really solid. I think it's interesting. We don't know what's going to happen with Rizzo. Also, I haven't mentioned Voit. We don't know if Voigt's going to be the first baseman. He got hurt a lot this year too, so he didn't really have the numbers he would have wanted either. Whether it was the injuries, whether it was COVID stuff, or whether it was just guys having down seasons, the Yankees probably should not have made it to the playoffs this year. If you really dive deep into the stats, their pitching rotation and their bullpen really held them afloat and pushed them into the postseason. And then Garrett Cole couldn't really get it done in the wild card game. So next year, obviously, the Yankees' goal is going to be to win the division, so they don't have to worry about the wild card game. But you got the Rays still there. You got Boston, who really had a great season, and like we talked about with Toronto, they're dangerous. So I think the AL East is definitely going to be the best division in baseball next year. It just so happens that one of those four teams is going to have to miss the playoffs because you can only have three from one division. You could have the division winner and two wild cards. So, but who knows? Maybe they'll expand the postseason with the CBA stuff. You never know what's going to happen. But Yankees, I expect them to be better next year, not just because they're my team, but because these guys have proven in the past, like I said, in their last full seasons, most of them were a lot better than they were this year. Okay, so moving on from that, we're just going to talk about a throwback player who you might have forgotten was as good as he was. So I'm going to talk about Matt Holliday. I'm going to talk about his numbers from 2006 through 2015. So his first three seasons were with Colorado. Then he had spent a half of the year with Oakland, and then he got traded to the Cardinals. So over these 10 seasons, he averaged about 142 games played. But people really are going to be surprised by some of these stats by Matt Holliday. I didn't remember he was good. I didn't remember he was this good. So during this time, he averaged a 341 batting average, 24 homers, 95 RBIs, a 905 OPS, and 9 stolen bases each season. Obviously the batting average maybe is a little bit inflated from his 3 years in Colorado, but you know what? He only spent 3 of these 10 seasons in Colorado, so you can't really say it was that much inflated. Excuse me. Matt Holliday, obviously, a lot of people will remember him from his years with the Cardinals, but he was really, really solid with the Rockies. And that half year with Oakland, he was pretty good too. So his postseason stats over these games, these years, he played 72 postseason games. 11 were with Colorado, and 61 were with St. Louis. He had 267, 13 homers, 37 RBIs, and 815 OPS, and 42 runs scored. So he was obviously a really good contributor in the postseason whenever he was with St. Louis. He obviously helped them win the World Series in 2012. He brought the Rockies to the playoffs, though, early on. I believe it was 2007 when they made it to the World Series. He was on that team against Boston. And his accolades over these 10 seasons, he was a 7-time All-Star, 4-time Silver Slugger. He won the batting title with Colorado in 2007. He was the 2007 NLCS MVP with Colorado as well. And like I said, he won the World Series in 2012 with the Cardinals. So he was the runner-up for MVP also in 2007. He finished in the top 23 MVP voting 8 times. Never did win one, but you look at these numbers, he easily probably could have been voted in to win one. I just think that a lot of people remember him from his St. Louis days. Obviously, I remember him from the Yankees too. He did have that one season with New York after, I believe it was 2017. He was with us. But Matt Holliday averaged a 341 batting average, man. That's pretty hard to do nowadays. And a 905 OPS. He was a corner outfielder. Nothing really to wow you. 24 homers, 95 RBIs each season. But you know what? That's pretty consistent. I would take that from the corner outfielder any day, especially if he's going to hit 341. I know we don't put a lot of emphasis on batting average anymore, but man, if you're hitting 341, you're doing something right, because that means you're getting a hit more than a third of the time. So I just think Matt Holliday, look back at his career. He was a great clubhouse guy, known as a great clubhouse guy, great chemistry guy on the team. You ask guys like Yachty, Troy Tulowitzki, they will say that he was a great guy to have on the team. So um, that's what I'm going to say about Matt Holliday. If you don't really remember Matt Holliday's career, go back and look at his years with Colorado. Also, go back and look at his slide with against the Padres, which I believe sent them into the playoffs, or it sent them past the wild card game or something like that. So pretty interesting slide there. It's really controversial still. So look that up. So now I'm just going to finish up with our stat of the week. So um, my stat of the week is Matt Holliday. Obviously, he won the World Series in 2012 with the Cardinals. Actually, that's my bad. Matt Holliday won the 2011 World Series, not the 2012 World Series. Obviously, the Giants won in 2012, but yeah, Matt Holliday. He my stat of the week is just going to be, man, just go back and look at that slide. Like I was saying before, I'm just remembering it now. When he was against the Padres, did his hand ever touch home plate? Obviously, they say it did. Will we ever know if it did or not? We can see the video. It looks like it's pretty controversial, but I'll let you guys decide. And that's him sending the team into the playoffs. So I don't know if there's any other time that a controversial slide like that controversial has sent a team into the playoffs. And I wonder what Matt Holliday would say about that now. But I was going to say, I bet that that's probably the only time that a slide like that has ever put a team in the playoffs. So that's going to wrap it up for us this week. So tune in next week. Might be just me again, might be with somebody else, but we'll see. Thanks for listening, and have a good week.